At 2 in the morning, a young security guard on patrol heard a mother begging, a child sobbing, and 3 men closing in with menace. Every rule told him to wait for the police, yet his conscience drove him forward. He lit the parking garage, set alarms blaring, and stepped out unarmed, ready to risk everything to save a terrified mother and her child. He did not know his courage would be repaid in ways he could never have imagined. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Drop a comment below and tell me. It's 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in Memphis, Tennessee. The fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead in the parking garage of Riverside Medical Center, casting long shadows between concrete pillars. Marcus Thompson, 29 years old, is making his routine patrol through level B2. For 8 years, Marcus had been working security. Not glamorous work, but it paid the bills and helped cover his mother's medical expenses. The night shift meant he could take online classes during the day, slowly chipping away at a degree in security management. His supervisor always said Marcus was different from the other guards, more observant, more careful. Maybe it was the basic self-defense training he'd gotten, or maybe it was just experience. But here's the thing about level B2, it had been a problem area for weeks. The security cameras had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted the lenses black 2 weeks ago. Marcus had filed 3 separate work orders, but IT kept saying the repairs were pending approval. Budget cuts. You know how it is. Marcus was thinking about his upcoming midterm exam when he heard voices echoing off the concrete walls. He paused, tilting his head to listen. Something in the tone made his pulse quicken. "Give me the purse, now." The voice was sharp with menace. Marcus's blood turned cold as he heard a child's terrified voice. "Mommy, I'm scared." Now every instinct told him to follow protocol, observe, report, support, don't engage directly. His supervisor, Frank Martinez, had hammered it into every guard. "You're not cops, you're not heroes, you're eyes and ears." But then he heard it again. That terrified sob of a child, followed by a woman's shaking voice, "Please don't hurt my son." Marcus pulled out his radio and pressed the emergency button. "Riverside Medical Parking B2, robbery in progress, woman and child," he whispered as he dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "Units dispatched, ETA 8-10 minutes," came the dispatcher's voice. 8 to 10 minutes. In a robbery, especially with a child involved, that might as well be 8 hours. He crept closer, staying in the shadows between the parked cars. The victims were about 50 yards away, near a silver Honda Civic. Marcus could see them clearly. Now 3 men surrounding a woman and a small boy. The largest man held a crowbar that gleamed dully in the fluorescent light. He was maybe 6'2", wearing coveralls with grease stains, nail polish chipped black on his fingertips. When he tilted his head, Marcus caught the smell of motor oil and cigarettes drifting across the garage. The other 2 were younger, both holding knives that they kept flicking open and closed. "Listen, lady," the big one said, his voice carrying clearly in the empty garage. There was something rehearsed about his tone, like he'd done this before. "You don't want to make this complicated. Just hand everything over." The woman was in scrubs under a light jacket, probably finishing a late shift. She was trying to position herself between the men and her son, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The kid was clutching a stuffed rabbit, like his life depended on it. "Please," the woman said, her voice steady despite obvious fear. "I'll give you everything. Just let us go." "Smart choice," the big man said. "Wallet, jewelry, car keys, and that watch." One of the younger men stepped closer to the boy. "Hey kid, that's a nice rabbit." "No," the child cried, holding the stuffed animal tighter. "He's mine." The man laughed. "Relax, I'm just looking." Marcus watched the terror in the child's eyes and felt something snap inside his chest. He thought about his own sister, how she used to hide behind him when neighborhood bullies picked on her. He thought about what his mother, Dorothy, always told him: "Sometimes doing right matters more than staying safe, but you got to be smart about it, baby." Here's what made Marcus different. He knew the parking garage's systems better than anyone. Instead of charging in like some movie hero, he moved carefully to the master control panel, mounted near the elevator bank. His hands were shaking as he opened the panel with his security key. First he flipped the test override he'd learned during last month's safety drill, and hit the emergency lighting system. The garage exploded into brilliant white light as every emergency fixture activated simultaneously. It was like someone had just flipped a switch on the sun. Then he triggered the security alarm for the section where the robbery was taking place. 4 car alarms started wailing at once, a deafening cacophony that echoed off the concrete walls like the world's worst symphony. "Security, police are coming. This area is under surveillance," Marcus shouted, using the garage's acoustics to make his voice boom from multiple directions. 2 of the 3 men immediately panicked. The younger ones looked around wildly, clearly spooked by the sudden light show and noise. "Man, this is too hot," one yelled. "Let's get out of here." They ran toward the exit ramp, their footsteps echoing off the walls like thunder, but the big man wasn't giving up. Marcus could see him scanning the garage, trying to locate the voice. "Where are you?" he yelled, raising the crowbar. "Come out here." Marcus's training told him to stay hidden until police arrived, but the woman and child were still in danger, and this man clearly wasn't deterred by intimidation tactics. That's when Marcus made the decision that would change everything. He stepped out from behind the cars, hands visible but ready. "Let them go. Police are 3 minutes out." He lied on purpose, letting the words ricochet in the concrete. Fear moved faster than truth. The man turned toward Marcus. For the first time, Marcus saw his face clearly, weathered, with tired eyes that spoke of too many bad choices. This wasn't some desperate kid making a mistake. This was someone who'd been down this road before. "You want to play hero," the man said, but there was hesitation in his voice now. Marcus had taken basic self-defense classes as part of his security training, but he'd never faced anything like this. The crowbar whistled through the air toward his head like a steel baseball bat. 8 years of night shift vigilance kicked in. Marcus ducked left, the crowbar missing his skull by inches. He felt the wind from the swing ruffle his hair. The man's momentum carried him forward, and Marcus grabbed his wrist, using the attacker's own force to redirect him toward a concrete support pillar. The impact was brutal. The sound of bone and flesh meeting unforgiving concrete echoed through the garage. The man went down hard, the crowbar clattering across the floor like loose change. But Marcus paid a price for his heroism. As he twisted away from the crowbar, his shoulder had slammed into the edge of a car bumper. Pain shot down his arm like electricity, and he felt warm blood soaking through his uniform shirt where the metal had torn through fabric and skin. The woman was already moving, scooping up her son and running toward Marcus. "Are you okay? Oh my God, you're bleeding." Marcus looked at his shoulder. The cut was deep but not life-threatening. "I'm fine. Are you hurt? Is your son okay?" The boy was staring at Marcus with wide eyes, still clutching his stuffed rabbit. "Are you a superhero?" Before Marcus could answer, sirens filled the garage. 2 police cruisers came screeching down the ramp with lights flashing, exactly 9 minutes after Marcus's 911 call. As the officers secured the scene and arrested the unconscious robber, the woman turned to Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you. You risked your life for complete strangers." Marcus was about to respond with some modest deflection when something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. The face was familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. Then she spoke again, and everything clicked. "Marcus Thompson." His heart stopped. "Dr. Wellington, Dr. Sarah Wellington." The physician who had treated his mother through 3 hospitalizations. The woman his mom always talked about with such gratitude and respect when she came back from her appointments. "Oh my God, Marcus, you're Dorothy's son." Dr. Wellington pulled her boy closer, her hand still shaking from adrenaline. "This is my son Tommy." Tommy looked up at Marcus with those wide 8-year-old eyes. "You saved us." The world suddenly felt very small. Here was Marcus, a night shift security guard making $1,200 every 2 weeks, and he just saved the life of one of the most respected doctors at the hospital where he worked. But more than that, he'd saved the life of the woman who'd been taking care of his mother for years. "Officer, this man saved us," Dr. Wellington told the first policeman on the scene, her voice still shaky but determined. "He's a real hero." Marcus shook his head, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. "Just doing my job, ma'am." But as he watched Dr. Wellington comfort her son, as he saw the relief flood her face, Marcus realized something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just about doing his job anymore. The next few days turned into a grind that felt heavier than the concrete of the parking garage. Marcus sat under the flicker of a fluorescent bulb in a small office that smelled like toner and stale coffee, filling out incident reports until the lines on the forms blurred and his hand cramped. 6 forms, each demanding the same story in a slightly different arrangement. 3 interviews with supervisors who nodded gravely and jotted notes like jurors, and enough stapled pages to make him worry about what the trees thought of men who did brave things. His shoulder throbbed under the gauze where a nurse had threaded in 6 neat stitches. The ache traveled down his arm like a slow tide that refused to pull back. The suspension notice arrived with bland language and a printed signature. 3 days without pay while the hospital investigated whether he had followed protocol. He read the words twice, the salary math forming in his head before he wanted it to. $247 for his mother's medication, 12 days until rent, $89 sitting in his checking account like a joke nobody laughed at. He folded the paper and slid it back into the envelope, because if he left it out on the counter it would feel like it had already taken up residence in their lives. At home, Dorothy moved around the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had learned to stretch $1 and a pound of beans. The apartment smelled like onions softening in oil and something warm in the oven. She set a plate in front of him, and watched him stare at it without picking up a fork. "You did the right thing, baby," she said, easing down into the chair across from him, and folding her hands like she was about to say grace over his tiredness. Marcus rubbed the heel of his good hand over his eyes, and let out a breath that felt older than 29. "The right thing doesn't pay rent, Mama." He hated how flat his voice sounded, like all the air had already been used up making reports and apologies. Dorothy straightened in her chair, the line of her mouth turning firm. "Since when do you measure doing right by how much money's in your pocket?" She held his gaze in that way she had, the one that could put him back at 8 years old and caught with a pocketful of pilfered jawbreakers, and for a moment the room went still. He lifted the fork then and took a bite, because eating was a kind of obedience and a kind of love. The knock at the door came soft but quick, the way people knock when they hope to be invited in and are ready to leave if they are not. Marcus looked through the peephole, and saw Doc Wellington in the hall, one hand resting on the shoulder of a boy who held a paper with both hands like it might fly away. Marcus opened the door and tried to square his shoulders without wincing. "Dr. Wellington, is everything okay?" She smiled with a settled warmth that surprised him, like someone had set a lamp down in a dark room. "Hi Marcus, I hope we're not intruding. We wanted to see you. We wanted to thank you properly." Tommy stepped forward on cue, and held the drawing up for Dorothy the moment she appeared behind Marcus. "I made this for you, Grandma Dorothy," he announced in a rush, the title landing in the room with the easy confidence of a child who trusts his heart. The picture showed a stick-figure man with broad shoulders and a red cape facing down 3 lopsided villains. Across the top, in careful blocky letters, Tommy had written, "Uncle Marcus the Hero." Dorothy pressed a hand to her chest and bent to admire it, her laugh coming out like a small bell. "Well, aren't you something?" she said, then ushered them in with a sweep of her arm. The apartment revealed itself in the way small places do when guests arrive, its neatness suddenly a kind of pride. Framed photos of Marcus at different ages lined the wall like mile markers. A stack of textbooks and a spiral notebook sat on the end of the couch with a pen wedged in the coils. The skillet on the stove hissed softly. Sarah looked around with a quiet, observant smile, and Marcus felt the heat creep up his neck. He wanted to clear the textbooks, to hide the bills, to put a better tablecloth on the table that had remembered every coffee ring. She saw the stack of envelopes with red print along one edge and the certificate from his security training course hanging in a cheap frame, and something tender moved across her face. She reached into her purse and brought out an envelope with his name written on it in a round, steady hand. "Marcus," she said, and her voice dropped into a softer register that told him she had chosen each word carefully. "This is a check for $5,000. It's the least I can do." The room narrowed for him, until it was just her, the envelope, and the humming refrigerator trying to hold the world together. He shook his head before his brain completed a sentence. "No," he said, his voice landing firmer than he felt. "I can't take that." She took a step closer and kept the envelope between them like a bridge. "You saved our lives," she said, and he heard the absolute truth in it. Not the kind of truth that asks for payment, but the kind that insists on gratitude. He swallowed, felt the stitches pull, and shook his head again. I didn't help you for money. I helped you because it was right. Dorothy watched the line get drawn, watched her son plant his feet the way his father used to when he had made up his mind. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed practical. Why don't you and Dr. Wellington talk in the kitchen, she said, laying a hand on Tommy's shoulder as naturally as if she had known him forever. I'll keep this young artist busy. Tommy gave a solemn nod, decided on a blue crayon, and sat at the kitchen table with Dorothy, who asked him questions about rabbits and superheroes like she had cleared her schedule just for that conversation. In the kitchen, Sarah placed the envelope on the counter and rested her fingertips on it the way people do when they are trying to show their hands are empty. Marcus, I'm not trying to insult you, she said. I'm trying to help. He leaned his hip against the counter to ease his shoulder and stared at the envelope like it might begin to explain itself. I know you want to help, he said, and he let the gratitude sit in his tone, because she had earned that. But taking your money would make what I did transactional, and I can't live with that. I don't want anything to change about how we know each other. He surprised himself saying it, the words arriving with the weight of something important. Sarah studied his face, the steadiness, the stubbornness, the decent reluctance, and she thought of how many times in the hospital she had watched people do the right thing quietly and refuse to turn it into a spectacle. Then maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong, she said, after a moment. This isn't about repaying a debt, this is about recognizing potential. Marcus looked up, the phrase catching like a coat on a nail. She took a breath and stepped into her own story. She told him about growing up in Mississippi with a father whose hands never stopped aching and a mother who sewed until her eyes went dry, about a scholarship letter that had arrived on a day when the air felt thin in the house, about professors who had said, "You can go farther," and how she had tried to find ways to say those words to other people ever since. "Every appointment your mother has," she said, her voice warming with some private affection, "she talks about you. Your classes, your dream of starting a security company. She lights up when she talks about how hard you work. She is so proud, Marcus. She wants the world to be kinder to you than it has been, and she never asks for anything for herself." He felt that last sentence slide under his ribs because it was true, and because its truth made him want to do better. Sarah went on. She explained the tuition assistance program in terms he could picture, percentages, semesters, forms he had probably already memorized. Then she told him about her seat on the hospital board. She did not dress it up, did not use big language. "There will be an assistant security manager position opening next year," she said. "I want to help you prepare for it. I want to mentor you, and I don't mean meetings that feel like a burden. I mean real coaching, real introductions, real time. This isn't charity, this is investment. I need someone I can trust to improve security hospital-wide, someone who thinks like you do." He stood very still while the words settled in the space between them. He could hear Tommy in the other room telling Dorothy that superheroes always have a plan. He could hear his mother's low laugh, a sound he had been missing lately. Doubt started its old song in his head anyway. What if I cannot keep up? What if I fail in front of everyone and pull her faith down with me? He stared at a tiny chip in the countertop laminate and tried to imagine his life bending in a new direction. His voice came out quieter than he meant it to. "I don't know, it feels too good to be true." Sarah's mouth tipped at one corner. "The best opportunities usually do," she said, and she let it rest there, without pressure, without salesmanship. When they went back to the living room, Dorothy looked up and saw something had shifted in her son's posture, something subtle around the shoulders that told her the question had moved from if to how. Sarah repeated the offer in plain words so Dorothy could measure it herself. Dorothy listened with an intensity that had opened more than a few doors in her life. When Sarah finished, Dorothy turned to Marcus and asked the question she asked when he was small and afraid of getting on a bicycle without training wheels. "Marcus, baby, what's holding you back?" The answer leapt out before he could disguise it. "Mama, what if I fail? What if I'm not smart enough, not good enough? What if I waste it?" Dorothy reached across the space and took his hands. The skin of her palms was work-worn, the grip unshakable. I've watched you work 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I've watched you study until your eyes burned because you wanted something better. I've watched you risk your safety for strangers. You think any of that happened by accident?" She turned to Sarah with the same steady fire. "Doctor, my son is scared because he's never been given something this big. But you won't find anyone who'll work harder or care more than him." A flush rose in Marcus's face at being seen and defended so completely, and for a second he wondered if it was possible that both things were true, his fear and their faith. Tommy lifted his head at exactly the right moment, because children have a way of hearing the heart of a room. "Uncle Marcus, are you going to be a student like me?" he asked, eyes wide and certain as a sunrise. The words slid through the heaviness and laid a hand on Marcus's chest. He looked at the boy who had chosen them after 3 days and meant it, looked at his mother who had stood between him and the world for as long as he could remember, looked at Sarah whose belief felt like a door held open with her own body. He found himself breathing a little deeper. He let his shoulders come down. "Yeah, Tommy," he said, and he heard the strength in his own voice for the first time that week. "I think I am." Dorothy squeezed his hands until he laughed and told her she was hurting him. Sarah exhaled like she had been holding her breath on a long swim. Tommy nodded as if he had known the answer all along and bent back over his drawing to add a second cape. They sat together then and let the conversation meander the way good conversations do when everyone stops performing. Sarah asked Dorothy for a recipe for cornbread, and Dorothy pretended to be secretive before giving up the measurements with a wink. Tommy explained the difference between good and evil in the complicated universe of third-grade cartoons, and Marcus listened like it was a lecture on ethics. He made coffee, careful not to spill, and the 4 of them drank it too late in the day because sometimes family is worth a jittery night. When Sarah stood to leave, she put a hand on Marcus's forearm and said, "We will do this at your pace. I'll email you tomorrow with the program forms and a schedule that won't break your back. You will meet with me every other week. When you need help, you won't have to knock twice." He nodded, another piece of weight shifting from his chest to his legs, where it could turn into motion. After the door closed and the hallway went quiet, Dorothy took the drawing down off the table and stuck it with a magnet to the refrigerator door. "That boy can draw," she said, then turned and looked at her son long enough to make him uncomfortable. "You're going to do this the right way," she said, not asking. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus answered, and the old exchange warmed both of them. Later, when the apartment had settled into the easy noises of dishes drying and the television murmuring, they stepped out onto the small balcony with 2 bowls of ice cream because sometimes sweetness is what keeps the edges from getting sharp. The Memphis night lay warm and close around them. Below, a car stereo thumped a bass line that held the city together for a few minutes at a time. Dorothy tapped her spoon against the rim of her bowl. "You know," she said, "I used to pray that someone would see you the way I see you." Marcus did not trust his voice, so he nodded and looked out at the streetlights. "I didn't help her because of the money," he said finally, "but I would be lying if I said the money didn't scare me too." Dorothy bumped his shoulder with hers, careful of the stitches, and smiled. "Baby, sometimes the thing that scares you is the thing that saves you. Just make sure it's the right kind of fear." He let out a long breath and told her he was going to try. When he lay down that night, the ceiling offered him the same cracks and shadows it always had, but the shape of his thoughts felt different. He walked again through the parking garage in his mind, heard the alarms, felt the crowbar pass close enough to lift his hair, watched the boy tuck a rabbit under his arm. He lingered on the sound of Tommy's voice, asking a simple question, and on the way his mother's hands had felt around his. He replayed Sarah's offer, until he could feel the edges of it soften into something he could hold without cutting himself. Somewhere between the red digits of the clock blinking and the radiators sighing into silence, he decided that the next morning he would do the tasks he could do. He would call his supervisor and confirm the suspension dates. He would ice his shoulder and take his mother to the clinic for her foot check. He would open Sarah's email and fill out the first form without looking at the total cost yet. One step, then the next, the way he had walked the dark floors of B2 for years. He closed his eyes and for the first time since the incident, fell asleep without bracing for the worst. Morning broke in with the friendly racket of a neighbor's radio and the smell of coffee Dorothy had started before he woke. He came into the kitchen to find his mother at the table with the drawing in front of her and a pen in her hand. She had written in block letters under Tommy's title, "Thank you for believing." Marcus poured coffee and took a sip that burned just enough to remind him he was still here. "You ready?" Dorothy asked. He nodded. "I'm ready." He touched the paper once, then gathered the bill stack and the notice and the small life they had built out of late shifts and small victories. He thought about how last night had felt like the edge of something and how edges, if you looked long enough, were just the borders of new ground. The day waited outside. The first semester nearly broke him. Marcus would finish his 10-hour night shift at 7 a.m., drive straight to campus for his 9 a.m. organizational psychology class, then stay for business mathematics in the afternoon. By the time he got home at 6 p.m., Dorothy would have dinner waiting. She'd learned to cook larger portions so Marcus could eat and then immediately fall asleep at the kitchen table with his textbooks. "Baby, you can't keep this up," she worried, watching him nod off over his economics homework for the third time that week. "I have to, Mama. Dr. Wellington is counting on me." But it wasn't just about Dr. Wellington anymore. The hospital's tuition assistance program covered 75% of his costs, but Marcus still had to come up with $3,000 each semester. He picked up extra shifts wherever he could, weekend events at the convention center, late-night security at construction sites. There were weeks when he got 12 hours of sleep total. But here's the thing that really made it hard. It wasn't just the workload, it was the whispers. Marcus got lucky. He overheard Jake Patterson, a 15-year veteran guard, telling another colleague in the break room one day, "Getting backed by Dr. Wellington makes promotion a lot easier than it is for the rest of us." Jake had trained Marcus when he first started, had shown him the ropes, taught him how to read people, how to de-escalate tense situations. Marcus respected him, which made the words hurt even more. Marcus had tried to respond diplomatically. "Jake, I'm just trying to do my best. You've taught me a lot. I'm grateful for that." "I'm sure you are," Jake had said. Not unkindly but not warmly either. "Just remember that some of us have been busting our asses here for years without getting special opportunities." The conversation haunted Marcus. Late at night when he was struggling through coursework on healthcare economics or crisis management theory, he would wonder, was Jake right? Was he just lucky? Did he really deserve what he was getting? The doubt followed him everywhere, crept into his interactions with classmates, made him second-guess every answer he gave in class discussions. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, didn't help matters. She cornered his mother at the mailbox one afternoon with that particular brand of nosiness that passes for concern. "Dorothy, Marcus is doing so well, going to college, getting promoted. But how did he advance so fast? Someone important must be helping him, right?" Marcus heard the conversation through their thin apartment walls as he tried to study for his midterm in healthcare law. His mother's response was immediate and sharp. "My son works 80 hours a week between his job and his studies. He earned everything he has." "Oh, I didn't mean anything bad," Mrs. Chen backpedaled quickly. "It's just unusual, you know? Such a big opportunity for someone so young." That night Marcus brought up the conversation with his mother. "Mama, maybe Mrs. Chen has a point. Maybe I am getting opportunities other people aren't." "Marcus Thompson." Dorothy's voice cut him off like a teacher calling attention to the class. "You stop that right now. You think Dr. Wellington would risk her reputation on someone who wasn't worthy? You think she'd recommend you for programs and positions if she didn't believe in you? But what if she's wrong? What if I'm not as good as she thinks?" Dorothy set down her knitting and looked at her son directly. "Baby, you know what I see when I look at you. I see a man who could have walked away that night in the garage, could have followed the rules, stayed safe, let someone else handle it. But you didn't. You saw people in trouble and you helped them." She picked up a framed photo from the side table. Marcus at his high school graduation, grinning despite the second-hand suit that was a little too big. "You know what else I see? A boy who worked weekends at Mr. Patel's grocery store to help pay for my insulin. A young man who chose the night shift so he could take care of me during my bad days. A son who never once complained about the sacrifices he was making." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. So when people like Mrs. Chen ask questions, or when Jake makes comments, you remember something: character can't be faked, work ethic can't be faked, and the kind of person who risks his own safety for strangers, that can't be faked either. Around this time something beautiful started happening. Tommy started spending more time at their apartment. His father had left when he was 6, and while Sarah tried to be everything to him, the demands of her job meant long hours and frequent overnight calls. Dorothy had become the grandmother Tommy had never had, and Marcus had become the stable male figure he'd been missing. "Uncle Marcus, will you help me with my math homework?" Marcus looked at the 8-year-old's workbook, filled with problems about fractions and percentages. "Tommy, this is 3rd grade math. Don't you think your mom would be better? Mom's at the hospital. She said you're really smart because you're in college." So Marcus found himself sitting at the kitchen table most evenings with both his advanced statistics textbook and Tommy's elementary math workbook open, switching between calculating standard deviations and helping a little boy understand that 1/2 was the same as 2/4. "Uncle Marcus, are you going to be a doctor like Mom?" "No, buddy, I'm studying security management." "What's that?" "It's about keeping people safe, making sure hospitals and other places are protected." Tommy considered this seriously, the way only children can. "Like how you protected us from the bad men, something like that. Will you teach me how to protect people too?" Marcus looked at this kid who'd somehow become part of his family, who called his mother Grandma Dorothy, and had his own drawer of clothes in their apartment for the nights when Sarah's shifts ran too long. "If you want to learn, I'll teach you." It was a promise that would mean more than Marcus realized at the time. One Sunday afternoon, in the middle of all this chaos, Marcus and Dorothy sat on their small balcony sharing ice cream cones from the corner store. The Memphis heat was brutal, but for 30 minutes, they just watched the neighborhood kids play in the street below. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Dorothy said, licking her strawberry cone. "What, Mama? You never stop being kind. All this stress, all this work, and you still helped Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries up 3 flights yesterday." Marcus smiled, vanilla ice cream dripping down his fingers. Sometimes the best moments were the simplest ones. As his second year progressed, Marcus began to see how all the pieces of his education fit together like a puzzle. The organizational psychology helped him understand why some security teams functioned well while others fell apart. The business courses taught him about budgets and resource allocation. The healthcare law classes showed him the complex regulatory environment that hospitals navigated every day. But more than that, he began to understand how his background, growing up poor, working multiple jobs, caring for a sick parent, gave him perspectives that his classmates didn't have. He knew what it felt like to make decisions under pressure. He understood the psychology of desperation, of what people might do when they felt trapped or scared. His professors began to take notice. His practical insights were becoming legendary in classroom discussions. When they talked about de-escalation techniques, Marcus could describe exactly what he'd seen work on the night shift. When they discussed employee motivation, he could explain why some of his colleagues showed up every day with enthusiasm, while others seemed to be counting down the hours until they could leave. Dr. Martinez, his organizational psychology professor, convinced Marcus to present his research on healthcare security from the front lines at the annual student research conference. Marcus was terrified. He'd never spoken in front of an academic audience before. But the presentation was a huge success. Hospital administrators from across the region attended, and several approached him afterward with job offers. "I'm still a student," Marcus kept telling them. "When you graduate, call us," they replied. But the biggest validation came from an unexpected source. Jake Patterson approached him after a shift one night during Marcus's final semester. "Marcus, I owe you an apology." "Jake, you don't." "Yes, I do. I thought you were getting opportunities because of who you knew, not because of what you could do. But I've been watching you these past 2 years, seeing how hard you work, how you balance everything, and seeing the changes you've already started making in our department." It was true. Even as a student, Marcus had been implementing small improvements to their security protocols. He'd reorganized the shift schedules to improve coverage during peak hours. He'd developed a training manual for new guards that reduced orientation time by 40%. He'd created a mentorship program that paired experienced guards with newcomers. "You've proven that education and experience together make someone better than either one alone," Jake continued. "And you've done it without forgetting where you came from, or acting like you're better than the rest of us." "Jake, I learned half of what I know from you and the other veterans. I could never think I'm better than you." "That's exactly why you're going to make a good leader." Marcus's graduation was a celebration that filled their small apartment with more people than it had ever held. Sarah and Tommy were there, of course, along with Marcus's professors, several of his co-workers, and neighbors who'd watched him study on their front steps during Memphis's humid summers when their apartment's air conditioning couldn't handle the heat from his computer. Dorothy wore her best dress and couldn't stop smiling. She'd worked extra hours for months to save up for a surprise, a leather portfolio with Marcus's initials embossed on the front. "For when you become a manager," she told him, her eyes bright with tears. "Because I know you will." But the real surprise came from Sarah. "Marcus," she said, pulling him aside during the celebration, "I have some news. The board has approved the creation of a new position, Assistant Security Manager. It's yours if you want it." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. After 4 years of night shifts and study sessions, of caffeine pills and stress dreams, of watching his mother worry about money while supporting his education anyway, he'd made it. "The salary is $48,000 to start," Sarah continued. "Plus full benefits, including dental and vision. And educational assistance if you ever want to pursue your master's degree." Marcus thought about the $1,200 every 2 weeks he'd been making as a guard. About the nights he'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table with his textbooks. About his mother's proud smile as she'd watched him walk across that graduation stage. "Yes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I want it." Tommy, who'd been listening from around the corner with the impressive stealth skills only children possess, came running over. "Uncle Marcus, does this mean you're going to be a boss now?" "I guess it does, buddy. Can I work for you when I grow up?" Marcus looked at this kid who'd been part of their family for 4 years now, who'd done his homework next to Marcus through countless study sessions, who'd seen what was possible when people supported each other through difficult transitions. "Tommy, by the time you're old enough to work, you're going to have so many options. You can do anything you want, but I want to help people like you do." Dorothy, who'd been watching this exchange with tears in her eyes, spoke up. "Then you better start studying hard, young man. Because your Uncle Marcus is going to expect excellence from everyone on his team." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus thought about journeys and destinations, about how sometimes the thing you think is an ending turns out to be just the beginning of something bigger. "Good people usually make good bosses," Tommy had said years earlier. The words echoed in Marcus's mind as he looked around at all these people who'd become his family. The promotion to Assistant Security Manager came with more than just a salary increase. Marcus got an office with an actual window and a nameplate that read Marcus Thompson, Assistant Security Manager. Every morning, he'd stare at it for a few seconds, still not quite believing it was real. 3 years ago, he'd been a night shift guard worried about making rent. Now he was responsible for coordinating security operations across the entire medical campus. But the transition wasn't easy. Some of the guards he'd worked alongside for years now reported to him. Some, like Jake, handled it professionally but with a certain distance that hadn't been there before. Others seemed to resent his rapid advancement. "Must be nice," Marcus overheard one guard saying to another, having connections in high places. But there were supporters too. Jenny Rodriguez, one of the veteran guards, pulled Marcus aside during his first week. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "My daughter's in college now, studying criminal justice. When she told me she wanted to go into security, I wasn't sure it was a good career choice. But seeing what you've accomplished, seeing that there's room to grow in this field, that changed my mind." "Jenny, you worked for this, Marcus. Don't let anybody tell you different." The real test came during Marcus's 3rd month in the new position. Code Silver. Psychiatric emergency in the ICU. Marcus had been reviewing staffing schedules when the announcement crackled over the intercom. A patient, Miles, a 45-year-old veteran named Rodriguez, had become confused and agitated. He'd grabbed a kitchen knife from a meal tray and was threatening staff. As Marcus rushed to the ICU, he could feel his team watching him. Jake was there along with 2 other guards. This was the test, his first real crisis as a leader. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked Dr. Patel, the ICU supervisor, trying to keep his voice calm despite his racing heart. "Mr. Patel has severe PTSD. He's been here for 3 days recovering from surgery, but something triggered him. He thinks he's back in Afghanistan." He grabbed the knife when Nurse Williams tried to give him his evening medication. Marcus looked through the window into the room. Rodriguez was backed into a corner, holding the knife defensively. His eyes were wide with terror, not rage. Marcus had seen that look before in his own father's eyes during one of his last visits home from Iraq. "He's not violent," Marcus said quietly, "he's scared." Jake looked at him skeptically. "Marcus, the guy has a knife. He's a veteran. He served our country." Marcus keyed his radio, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made a decision. "All units, stand down. No weapons, no aggressive movements. This man is not our enemy." Marcus thought about his own father, who died in Iraq when Marcus was 16. He thought about the stories his mother had told him about soldiers coming home from war, about how hard it was to readjust to civilian life. He walked into the room slowly, hands visible, speaking in a calm, clear voice. "Mr. Patel, sir, my name is Marcus. I know you served our country. You're safe here. You're in a hospital in Memphis. Can you tell me what you see in this room right now?" It took 25 minutes. 25 minutes of talking, of listening, of treating a scared man with the respect he deserved. Marcus used grounding techniques he'd learned in his psychology classes, asking Rodriguez to describe the blue walls, the beeping monitors, the Memphis skyline outside the window, anything to anchor him to the present moment and pull him back from whatever battlefield was playing in his mind. When Rodriguez finally put down the knife, he collapsed into a chair, sobbing like a child. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to scare anyone." "You don't have anything to apologize for," Marcus told him, his own voice thick with emotion. "You're a hero, you served our country with honor, you're safe now." The police had arrived during the incident, but Marcus had managed to resolve it before they needed to intervene. As they took Rodriguez's statement, he wouldn't be charged, as everyone understood this was a medical episode, not a criminal act. Jake approached Marcus. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, and Marcus could hear the genuine respect in his voice. That was how a real leader handles things. "I couldn't have done that. Jake, you taught me half of what I know about reading people, about staying calm under pressure. I learned that from you." Jake smiled for the first time in months. "Maybe. But knowing how to use what you've learned, that's something else entirely." Later that evening, Sarah found Marcus in his office, staring out the window at the city lights with his hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "I heard about the Rodriguez incident," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You handled it perfectly." "I was scared the whole time," Marcus admitted, still not turning away from the window. "Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you thinking about consequences." Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of a mentor who'd seen potential fulfilled. "Marcus, do you know why I really recommended you for this position? Because I helped you and Tommy, that's how I met you, but that's not why I recommended you." Sarah's eyes were serious now. "I recommended you because in 8 years of working with security personnel, I've never seen anyone who combined technical competence with genuine empathy the way you do. What you did with Mr. Patel tonight, that's not something you can teach in a classroom." Marcus thought about the look in Rodriguez's eyes when he'd finally realized where he was, when the present moment had come back into focus and the terror had faded. "This job isn't really about security, is it?" Marcus said. "It's about taking care of people. Now you're getting it." Silence. Then the knife hit the floor. 6 months later, everything changed again. The call came on a Friday afternoon, and Sarah's voice was excited, almost breathless when Marcus picked up the phone. "Marcus, I need to see you in my office. Can you come up now?" When Marcus arrived, Sarah was pacing behind her desk like a tiger in a cage, barely able to contain her energy. "I just got offered the position of Chief Medical Officer for Wellington Health Network," she said without preamble. 5 hospitals across Tennessee and Mississippi. Marcus felt his stomach drop like he was on a roller coaster. "Congratulations. That's incredible." "It is, and I want you to come with me." "What?" "Director of Security for the entire network. You'd be responsible for coordinating security operations across all 5 facilities, developing system-wide protocols, managing a team of security managers." Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "Sarah, that's enormous. 5 hospitals, thousands of employees. The board has some reservations about your experience level," Sarah admitted. her honesty cutting through any false comfort. "They're wondering if you're ready for something this big." "Maybe they're right. Marcus, look at me." Sarah's voice was firm, the voice of someone who'd fought her own battles and won. "You've proven yourself over and over. The Rodriguez incident, your presentations to our board, the way you've built respect and trust with your team. I'm not offering you this job because I feel sorry for you or because I owe you something. I'm offering it because you're the best person for it." The interview with the Wellington Health Network board was intimidating in a way that made Marcus's first presentation look like a casual conversation. A conference room full of executives in expensive suits, all asking pointed questions about Marcus's experience, his education, his plans for managing security across multiple facilities. But Marcus had been preparing for this moment, in one way or another, for 6 years. He presented his comprehensive security assessment, complete with crime reduction statistics from Riverside, staffing recommendations for each facility, and budget projections that showed he understood the financial realities of healthcare. Most importantly, he outlined his vision for what he called the Guardian Mentorship Program. "We're not just hiring security guards," Marcus told the board, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "We're building careers. Over the past 3 years, I've mentored 12 guards at Riverside, 4 have been promoted to supervisory roles, 3 have completed degree programs, and 2 have transferred to other hospitals in management positions." He clicked to his next slide, showing retention statistics and cost savings that made the CFO lean forward with interest. "When we invest in our people, they invest in our mission. Employee turnover in our security department has dropped by 50% since we implemented mentorship protocols. That translates to reduced hiring costs, better institutional knowledge, and more consistent patient care." The CEO, Mr. Harrison, leaned forward. "This is impressive, Marcus. But managing one hospital is different from coordinating 5. How do we know you can scale this up?" Marcus had anticipated this question, "Because the principles don't change, sir. Whether you're managing 10 people or 100, it comes down to clear communication, consistent training, and genuine investment in your team's success." He told them about Rodriguez, about the importance of treating security not as a police function but as patient care. He talked about the interconnected nature of healthcare security, how an incident at one facility could affect the entire network's reputation and effectiveness. "My goal isn't just to keep our hospitals safe," Marcus concluded. "It's to create a culture where security personnel see themselves as healthcare providers, where they're trained and supported and valued accordingly." The vote was unanimous, but success never comes without challenges, and Marcus learned that lesson quickly. The transition wasn't smooth. The Nashville facility's security director, a 20-year veteran named Carl Morrison, initially resisted Marcus's new protocols with the passive-aggressive resistance that only middle management can perfect. "We've been doing things a certain way for decades," Morrison told Marcus during their first meeting, his arms crossed and his tone making it clear what he thought of young upstarts with college degrees. "Our way works." It took a tense 3-month period where Marcus had to prove his systems worked. The breakthrough came when a potential security breach at the Nashville facility was prevented using Marcus's new early warning protocols. A patient's estranged husband, who had a restraining order against him, was identified and removed before he could reach his wife's room. The old system would have relied on staff recognizing him after he'd already gotten inside. When Morrison finally called to thank him, Marcus could hear the grudging respect in his voice. Marcus also faced budget constraints that forced him to make difficult choices. The board wanted him to choose between upgrading technology and expanding the mentorship program. Marcus chose the program, believing that investing in people would yield better long-term results than new equipment. "Technology becomes obsolete," he told the board. "Character doesn't." 3 years later, Marcus stood at the podium of the Memphis Marriott Ballroom, looking out at 400 security professionals from across the Southeast. The annual Guardian Network conference had grown beyond anything he'd imagined when he first proposed the mentorship program. "When I started this journey 8 years ago," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the packed room, "I was just a night shift guard who got lucky. Or at least that's what some people said." Laughter rippled through the audience, the kind of knowing laughter that comes from shared experience. In the front row, Sarah sat next to Tommy, who was now 18 and heading to college on a Guardian Foundation scholarship. The gangly 8-year-old who'd clutched a stuffed rabbit in a parking garage had grown into a confident young man with plans to study business and security management. Next to them, Dorothy Thompson wore her best dress and the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen. At 74, she was in better health than she'd been in years, thanks to the excellent insurance coverage that came with Marcus's promotion and the steady job Sarah had given her. But I learned something over these years, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who'd lived through transformation. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And opportunity, that's what we create for each other. Jake Patterson, now the regional training coordinator, stepped up to introduce the next speaker. The man who'd once questioned Marcus's rapid advancement now spoke with genuine admiration. "This man changed my mind about what leadership looks like," Jake said. "I used to think leaders were born, not made. Marcus proved me wrong. He proved a lot of people wrong." The statistics were impressive, but they only told part of the story. 247 security guards had advanced their careers through the Guardian network. 12 hospitals in 6 states had implemented the program. Employee turnover in participating hospitals had dropped by 43%, saving the healthcare system over $3.2 million annually. But Marcus was proudest of the individual stories. Maria Santos, a single mother who'd started as a part-time guard and was now managing security for an entire medical campus in Nashville. David Chen, a former addict who'd found purpose and stability through the program. Lisa Johnson, a former EMT who was using her medical background to revolutionize emergency response protocols. After his speech, Marcus found his mother in the lobby. She was talking to a group of young security guards, showing them photos on her phone with the pride that only a mother can possess. "This is my Marcus when he was Tommy's age," she was saying. "Always protecting the neighborhood kids from bullies, Mom," Marcus said, embarrassed but smiling. "I'm proud of you, baby," Dorothy said, reaching up to hug her son. "Your daddy would have been proud too." Tommy appeared at Marcus's elbow, now tall enough to look his uncle in the eye. "Uncle Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I'll be as good a leader as you someday?" Marcus looked at this young man who'd gone from a scared 8-year-old in a parking garage to a confident teenager with plans and dreams of his own. Tommy had legally taken Sarah's last name when she adopted him after his father passed away 3 years earlier, but he'd kept Thompson as his middle name, a tribute to the family that had embraced him. "Tommy, you're going to be better than me, because you're going to have advantages I never had. Good schools, mentors from day one, and a support system that's believed in you from the beginning. But most importantly, you've got something that can't be taught." "What's that?" "You care about people. That night in the garage, the first thing you asked me was if your mom was okay. Not if the bad guys were caught, not if you were safe. You wanted to know about someone else. That's what real leadership is." The call came at 2:23 a.m. on a Thursday, pulling Marcus from sleep in his comfortable 2-bedroom apartment. A far cry from the small place he'd shared with his mother for so many years. It was Maria Santos, calling from Nashville. "Mr. Thompson, we have a situation in parking level B2. Attempted robbery, but I handled it according to protocol. Suspects fled when backup arrived. No injuries." Marcus smiled in the darkness of his bedroom. B2. The same level where everything had started 8 years ago. "Good work, Maria. Full report in the morning." "Yes, sir. And Mr. Thompson, thank you for teaching us that brains work better than brawn." After he hung up, Marcus lay awake thinking about cycles, about how one moment of decision could ripple outward in ways you never expected, about the scared security guard he'd once been, and the man he'd become. His phone buzzed again. A text from Sarah. "Saw the Nashville B2 incident report. Maria handled it perfectly. Your training is working." Marcus texted back, "Not my training. Our training. We built this together." Speaking of which, came Sarah's reply. "Tommy's graduation is next week. He's valedictorian. The speech is about mentorship and second chances, the Guardian Foundation. They'd established it 3 years ago with proceeds from their book, Healthcare Security Leadership, which had become required reading in hospital training programs across the country. The foundation provided scholarships, training resources, and mentorship programs for security personnel throughout the healthcare industry. Marcus got up and walked to his window, looking out over Memphis. The Mississippi River reflected the city lights, flowing south toward the Gulf of Mexico like a ribbon of liquid starlight. Somewhere out there, security guards were walking their beats, protecting people, making the kind of split-second decisions that could change everything. He hoped they were prepared. He hoped they had mentors and support systems and people who believed in them. But even if they didn't, he hoped they'd make the right choice when it mattered. Because sometimes, Marcus had learned, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing anyway. It's about seeing someone who needs help, and deciding to help them, even when it's inconvenient or scary, or might not work out. It's about building something bigger than yourself. Years later, the story had grown beyond anything Marcus Thompson could have imagined on that loud concrete night when everything changed. The Guardian network operated now in 14 states and 73 hospitals. The map on his office wall carried pushpins like little beacons: Atlanta, Birmingham, Nashville, Raleigh, each one a place where someone in a blue jacket stood a little taller because somebody had believed in them. Marcus had been promoted to regional security director for the Southeast. He supervised teams he used to only read about: dispatchers, unit chiefs, training leads, spread across a region big enough to make his phone buzz at odd hours. The headquarters in Memphis employed 49 people, most of them former guards who had come up through the mentorship program, each of them proud of the title on their badge because they knew what it cost to earn it. Tommy Thompson Wellington was 23 now, lean and long-legged, fresh out of college with degrees in security management and business administration. He had started as Marcus's executive assistant 2 weeks earlier, dropping into the rhythm of the work like a kid who knew the words to a song he had grown up hearing through the wall. He printed agendas early, carried a legal pad like it was a shield, and asked questions Marcus wished he had asked at that age. He wanted to learn the business from the ground up, and he said it without swagger. From the mailroom to the boardroom, Tommy told him, grinning, and Marcus heard in that line the echo of a small boy asking if a stranger was a superhero. Dorothy Thompson was 79 and retired in theory. In practice, she spent her mornings at the Guardian Foundation's front desk with a thermos of sweet tea and a cardigan over her shoulders, welcoming families who looked tired in the way people do when bills and pills tug at opposite ends of a month. She called herself the grandma of the Guardian family, and when she said it, folks believed her. She remembered names, asked about blood sugar numbers, slipped granola bars into a purse here and there. She was proof that kindness could be both fierce and matter-of-fact. On a warm Tuesday in May, Marcus stood again in the parking garage where his life had turned. Level B2 did not hum the way it used to. The old fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by clean strips of LED that erased the murky corners. HD cameras covered angles he used to worry over, and motion sensors fed a quiet green heartbeat to the security office. His reflection hovered briefly in the shine on a painted line, a man older at the temples but steadier in the eyes. The air smelled faintly of detergent and hot rubber. It felt safer, not because of the machines alone, but because of what had grown around them: procedures, training, an expectation that help would be both competent and kind. "Mr. Thompson," a young voice carried carefully across the echo. He turned and saw Officer Lisa Johnson walking toward him. She wore her uniform neat, shirt tucked, boots clean, hair pulled back in a firm band. 26 and already a supervisor on shift when others called in sick, she carried herself like someone who had done the math on last month's groceries and still found room to smile at the cashier. "What is it, Lisa?" he asked, sliding his hands into his pockets to keep from fussing with his tie. "I wanted to thank you again for the scholarship recommendation," she said, stopping at a polite distance. "My kids are going to be so excited when I graduate next month." She let herself grin then, the way a person does when letting the good news show feels like opening a window. Marcus nodded, remembering a framed photo of his own graduation on his mother's shelf, him in a too-big suit, Dorothy's hands on his shoulders, both of them trying not to cry. "You earned every bit of it," he said, "and when your time comes, pass it forward. You know the rule." Lisa exhaled, serious again. "Actually, that's why I caught you. We've got a new guard starting Monday. Jennifer Martinez, single mom, 2 jobs, trying to finish her degree online." It sounded familiar. It did, and the memory settled over his chest with a weight that was gentle instead of heavy. He thought of himself at 29, counting dollars, counting hours, counting on a hope that felt like a thin bridge in the dark. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Just want to make sure she's paired with the right mentor, someone who gets it, someone who won't mistake tired for lazy." "I'll talk to Maria," Marcus said. "She's good with the new folks, kind and blunt in the right order." Lisa smiled, gave a short nod, and turned back toward the elevators. Marcus watched her go and felt that familiar quiet pride, the kind that did not puff you up so much as set your feet firmer on the ground. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Sarah's name. "How's retirement treating you?" he asked when she answered, pacing slowly toward the memorial plaque near the elevator bank. He could hear a kettle somewhere behind her on the call, the small domestic sound of water preparing to do what it always did. "Retirement is overrated," Sarah said with a laugh he could see in his head, her hand waving the word away. "I'm thinking about teaching part-time at the nursing school, maybe working up a curriculum around healthcare security. God knows we need more crosstalk between our worlds." "You say our worlds like you ever left," Marcus said, stopping in front of the plaque. "Tommy would love having you closer to our side of the building." "How is he settling in?" Sarah asked. He heard the kettle click off and imagined her pouring slowly, the way people pour when they decide to sit and talk a while. "He's incredible," Marcus said, and he let the word linger. "Better than I was at his age. He's already sketching a plan to expand to Canada and the UK. He keeps telling me the model works wherever people care about taking care of one another." "Of course he does," Sarah said warmly. "He has your ambition and my stubborn streak. It will either save the world or drive his board chair mad." Marcus smiled and let himself picture her at a kitchen table, without a pager on her belt, steam rising from a mug, sunlight on the edge of the counter. He told her about Dorothy's latest project, a support group for families of healthcare workers that had grown to 12 hospitals across 3 states, and she hummed her approval in that low, sure way. They spoke for a few more minutes about the foundation's calendar, about Tommy's upcoming presentation, about a kid in Nashville who had just passed his GED after 3 tries. When they said goodbye, neither of them rushed. They had learned that hope likes a little space. Marcus slid his phone into his jacket and looked up at the plaque they had installed 3 years earlier on the 10th anniversary. The bronze caught the light, the letters cut deep and clean, in memory of the moment when courage met opportunity and a guardian was born. Dedicated to all those who choose to protect others, and to the belief that one person's decision can change countless lives. Below it Tommy's idea sat in smaller type, the Guardian Network. Established 2024, protecting people, building futures. Marcus reached out and let the back of his fingers brush the metal, a gesture more habit than ceremony, the way some folks touch a steeple doorframe on the way in. He pressed the elevator button and considered the day ahead, a conference call with hospital administrators in Charlotte who wanted the program, a mid-morning meeting with the scholarship committee to argue for 2 more slots, lunch with Jennifer Martinez, because sometimes the right first impression is a warm meal, and 30 minutes of eye contact. But first he would stop by his mother's apartment, because Tuesday dinners had turned into a sacrament. Dorothy insisted he needed real food instead of whatever he grabbed from the cafeteria, and he knew enough now to see the truth under her teasing. She wanted to watch his face soften while he ate, to listen to the shape of his day, to remind both of them that success had not pulled him out of her orbit. He felt the elevator rise under his feet, and thought about circles. 10 years ago, he had been a night shift guard making a small choice in a loud place. That choice had reached into classrooms, into boardrooms, into kitchens where children sounded out new words. People like to say the world turned on big events. He had learned it turned also on small steady faith. When the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, he stepped out with his tie straight and his briefcase in hand. The windows along the corridor poured Memphis straight into his day, the river muscled and brown under the sun, the stitched-together blocks of the medical district, roofs and alleyways and porches, where people were already making deals with the morning. Somewhere a security guard was pinning on a badge and checking a watch. Somewhere a single mother was zipping a backpack and kissing a forehead before the bus. Somewhere a young person was about to make a decision that would ripple farther than they could picture now. He unlocked his office and paused on the threshold, looking at the photos on the credenza program, graduates with their caps crooked, a clipped article about retention rates,
a Crayola drawing of Uncle Marcus the hero, the stick figure cape still heroic after all these years. He placed his briefcase on the chair, and ran a cloth over the desk without thinking, the same smooth motion he had used to wipe counters at 18, in Mr. Patel's grocery store. Work was work, whether it was fruit stacked in a pyramid, or budget stacked in a spreadsheet. The idea was to leave a space better than you found it. The phone on his desk began to ring, the line lighting up with the clean insistence of the present. He picked it up and felt the weight of it, familiar now, never casual. Guardian Network, this is Marcus, he said. How can I help you? On the other end, a voice started in, and he listened. Listening, he had learned, was the first real act of protection. He took notes. He asked a question that made the caller slow down and breathe. He promised a call back and meant it. He hung up, dialed another number, and carried the problem where it needed to go. As the morning gathered momentum, emails answered, a briefing revised, a quick walk down the hall to check on the training room. His mind returned to the garage and to the way this floor now held, not just safer light, but a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a place prepared. He thought, not for the first time, that his purpose had never been to be the hero of his own story. The real work was to make paths and hold doors and stand still in the right places so that other people could discover their own bravery without having to shout to be heard. He picked up his mother's Tupperware from the office mini-fridge, collard greens, and a square of cornbread wrapped in foil, and smiled at the label she had stuck on the lid in fat, looping pen. Eat this, Mom. He set it back for lunch and opened his calendar. Charlotte at 9. Scholarships at 10, new guard at 12, a decent day's work, if he kept his shoulders loose and his answers short. He stepped to the window again and watched a barge push up river. The water shouldered it along, steady and indifferent. He remembered his mother's voice in that small kitchen years ago, the one with the noisy fridge, telling him that doing right mattered more than staying safe, but that if you used your head, sometimes you could do both. He had not forgotten, he did not plan to. The phone rang again. He reached for it, already leaning forward.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.